All right, we're recording now.
Excellent. Rob Astorino, candidate for governor, former Westchester County executive, elected twice in a Democratic area. He ran against Governor Andrew Cuomo in 2014. Mr. Astorino, thank you for coming here on Talking Saratoga today.
Dan and Robin, it's good to be with you. I love Saratoga. It's one of my favorite places in New York. Truly is. I love that the village feel there and the racetrack, and it's a beautiful place that you live in.
Well, thank you so much. We don't often get a lot of love from candidates on your level, and it really means the world that you would take some time to do local media like this. We're very grateful.
The love to come is in January when I get elected and sworn in.
Excellent. I met you in Saratoga on North Broadway at a Kathy Marchione fundraiser.
Oh, okay.
Back in the day, huh, Dan?
Yeah. You've been to 3,000 fundraisers since then, so of course you remember that one.
No, I do remember the Kathy Marchione one. I do. Yep.
Okay.
And
by the way,
you were just telling me you remember Dan too, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's just hop right into kind of the news of the day, because it's impossible to ignore the significance of the last 24 hours and the two decisions that have come down from the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And so before we get into the local and regional questions that we have for you, I just wanted you to take your time and let us know what your opinion is on the rulings pertaining to reproductive rights and with gun control.
Well, let me change the phraseology for a second on gun control and make it criminal control, because that's, in my view, really what it is. And we're not controlling the criminals in New York. Certainly with this sort of leftist agenda that's taken hold. And unfortunately, illegal possession of a gun is the first charge that they drop when somebody is arrested. And so they're talking tough about people who have a Second Amendment right, and the good people who actually go through the process, get their permits, go through their background checks, and are having a gun for their own purposes and being responsible. And that the criminals who are running around are on no cash bail getting out the next day or by lunchtime. Again, these charges are being dropped. They're emptying out our prisons. They're defaming and defunding cops and cutting, resources. So we've got it backwards, I think. Everything that the state has done, like the SAFE Act, for instance, that was supposed to tell, everybody this will never happen again. That's what they were told. Cuomo would say back in 13 and 14. And we know, unfortunately, anytime something like this happens, it's a rush to do something. The problem is, though, everything that we've done has not worked, because criminals, by their very nature, could care less about gun-free zones or whether or not they should get a pistol permit or what the law is. They're intent on doing something. And unfortunately, it's the legal gun owners who stand in line, do the right thing, who are always kind of penalized more and more for the actions of the bad people. So, I don't think what they're doing is going to do anything other than, again, take the rights away of people. Things like micro-stamping, we don't even have the technology to do that. Raising the age to 21 sounds good. The problem is federal courts in California have already found it to be unconstitutional. So they knew that when they did it, but they did it just to say, hey, look, we did something.
May I ask you a question, Mr. Astorino? I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you think that repealing the SAFE Act, even though it might not have accomplished everything it was set to accomplish, is a step in the right direction? Or do you think that identifying the problems that still exist and building off of that?
The SAFE Act has done nothing, and it won't do anything, in my opinion. That's been proven, unfortunately, with the explosion of crime throughout New York, and of course, unfortunately, the mass shooting in Buffalo. But things like, if we're going to have a red flag law, then what we should include in those are criminal records. Obviously, that's there, but things like mental health records and juvenile records, that will at least give a complete picture with the background check on whether or not a gun should be allowed to be sold. And mental health, we are in a crisis in mental health. I can tell you personally, I've had to deal with family members. I know many people who have got caught in the system that they can't even get the help that they need. This governor and the previous one, Cuomo, they've cut psychiatric funding, they've cut beds, they've cut institutions. And yet they're saying we've got to deal with mental health, but we're not. So it's a complicated issue. I don't want to make it sound like it's very easy.
No,
The one thing that we do know is that what we've been doing has not worked.
Two more quick follow-ups on that.
Sure.
Do you think there's some futility to doing anything as a state when really, if every state has different gun control measures, nothing is going to change unless we have something at a federal level that's done? I mean, is there some futility to states passing their own legislation?
Well, I do think there should be reciprocity, and I do think that the Second Amendment ruling that came out by the Supreme Court was an important one, and it basically said, yes, states do have the right to have a licensing procedure. However, what they don't have the right to do is just indiscriminately pick and choose who gets and who doesn't. That sets up a class system. And we see in New York where people wait forget months, they wait for a year or two to get their license. And then again, a judge is going to say, well, you don't, you do. The burden of proof has to go to the state on this constitutional issue. And they have to prove why, in a unique circumstance, somebody who passes their background check, fills out their permits, are not entitled to get it. As opposed to the other way around, where you, who have the constitutional right, have to prove to the state why it's worthy of you getting it. That's the background, and that's what the Second Amendment is there for. But that's also why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did on the New York case.
My second quick
I was
follow-up.
somebody, and pardon me to interrupt, I was somebody that decades ago was put in that position. I was approved for a pistol permit, but unless I was going hunting or target shooting, I could not leave the house with it, which was the absurdity of it. I went through a lengthy, what people don't realize is that's like a 6-month background investigation. They interviewed my ex-girlfriend. That's how detailed it was.
That's correct.
Yet at the end of the day, I wasn't allowed to leave the house with the gun.
That's right. And the other thing, Dan, so I'm a concealed carry permit holder. I do have a gun, but let's say I wandered from the Westchester border into New York City in the Bronx. Before this ruling, I was a felon if that happened. Imagine that. And criminals could care less. So this leveled the playing field and put the burden on the government, not on the individual who has that right under the Constitution.
So my second quick follow-up for you is when we talk about mental health, which I think is sometimes can be like a real distraction because we end up talking about mental health and we all agree that there need to be more resources in the mental health area, but it tends to kind of divert the conversation and nothing seems to get accomplished. To me, I have 4 young children. The people who spend the most time with my children are their teachers and their educators in their school. And so I feel like if our schools had more resources and we had more eyeballs on our children in school, smaller class sizes, more school psychologists, SROs in every school, that would help identify the problem before it got to a level of violence. Is that something you would agree with?
I do, and I'll tell you why. And we did it in Westchester. We gave money from the county. I was county executive in Westchester for 8 years, and we provided some funding and school resource officers for the schools who did want it. I think one of the things that is missing from this is funding, and I think federally this will happen, to harden our schools, to make sure there is one ingress and egress so you can have a system of safety in place. You look at where these shootings happen, they do not happen in urban schools where oftentimes these urban schools have metal detectors, 1 point in and out. They have police officers in the school. They're close to police departments. Where they happen, of course, is in rural areas or suburban areas where it's wide open campuses. Obviously, a gun-free zone does not mean it's a force field. It just means law-abiding citizens say, I got to leave my gun in the car or at home. And then the criminal says, this is perfect. Nobody's going to be able to fire back. So you're right. I do think we do. And in Westchester, we had something called youth mental health first aid, basically. And we provided on a county basis, after consultation with psychologists and others, how to train coaches, parents, teachers, religious, to spot the warning signs in kids who are going to need help and to get them that help, because you're right, that's where they spend a lot of time.
And I do think SROs, sometimes people think, okay, you just wanted the good guy with a gun in a school, when we know that's not really what I want from my SRO. SROs are trained to spot these problems in kids and not just be there to be punitive. So
that's correct.
That is great to hear. Moving on to reproductive rights. It's been a rough day for some of us ladies out there, many of us. Would love your opinion on Roe v. Wade being overturned.
Well, again, what happens is this goes to the states. New York is obviously a very blue state with pretty solid majorities of Democrats in both the House and Senate, in the Assembly and the Senate. It is the law in New York in 2019. They passed it, it codified. But I do think most people on either side would agree, and I know most pro-choice people agree with this too, that the abortion laws in places like New York have gone so far, so extreme, where in New York, you literally can have an abortion up to the moment of birth if you can find a doctor that would do it, and some will, basically for any reason. And most people are not in favor of something. So I don't
know if that's true, but
it is true. It is true. The definition of health is not defined in the code. So you can, for a variety of reasons. Now, most people, thank God, won't do that, but some will. And I think most people say, after the first trimester or certainly viability, most people are uncomfortable and don't believe in that. So I think we can have a reasonable discussion in a state like New York on where the line should be drawn and some reasonable restrictions. But I also think we should go to the other direction as well, provide funding for people who need prenatal care, who need care after the birth, pregnancy care centers. Those are kind of things I think we should also be helping out. Unfortunately, the vast majority of abortions, over 75%, are by low-income women who feel that they have no other option. And I think if we provide those options, they might make a different choice, a choice that they really, don't want to have to make. So I do think we should have a discussion in New York, but the realism is abortion will be legal in New York and not in jeopardy of being taken away. There are some other states where it might, or they would have bigger restrictions. New York, logically speaking, is not going to be one of them.
Well, I may not agree with everything you just said, but I do agree with reasonable discussion. So yeah. I'm a big fan of reasonable discussion all around. Dan, go ahead.
Segue off of that. You touched on it. You said the Democratic majority in both houses of the legislature. This is two uphill battles for you, at least from my perspective, of both the primary and the general election. If you beat the odds and suddenly you're governor in January, how do you work with a legislature that, let's face it, is not changing? Both houses are going to be Democratic for a long, long time. How would you, as governor, be able to get anything done consistent with your platform?
So I beat the odds in Westchester in 2009. And for people who don't know, Westchester is 3-1 Democrat. That's
a tough one. That's a real badge of honor right there.
Yeah. And look, I focused on what really mattered. If you remember 2009, Obama had gotten elected, so the Democrats controlled everything. And the bank crisis, so we were in a recession. And people were really concerned, as they are today, about being able to provide for their family, or whether they're going to lose their job or afford anything. And that's the discussion most people are having right now, along with crime, around their kitchen tables and with their friends. And I think we're definitely going to pick up. I will win this race. It is one of those political earthquake years like it was in 2009 for me to get elected there. And I think most people want some balance. And I've been saying that this is going to be the revenge of the normal people this year, that people of all stripes are being like, look, enough of this cancel culture nonsense of screaming and, not everyone is a racist if you don't agree with somebody. And, all these kind of things that add up, including the crime and the inflation and the economy. And that's where people are going to be like, look, we need some balance, some checks and balances. How would I get things done? Well, I had a county board full of Democrats as well for my whole 8 years. They had the majority. But I planted the flag. And I said, we're not raising spending and we're not raising taxes, period. And we didn't. And in fact, we cut the county property taxes. We kept the budget at $1.8 billion the entire 8 years. That fiscal sanity allowed businesses to stay and grow and people to get a breather. And then we worked on other things together. We accomplished, like I mentioned before, the youth mental health first aid, as we were talking about, and many other things. We had an initiative with at-risk fathers who had fallen away from their families and kids. Those were important things. And, so we worked well together, even though we disagreed at times. And, the budget process alone, the governor has an extraordinary amount of power to get things done. And Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who is the Senate leader, she and I served together in the Westchester County Board of Legislators. We've known each other a long time. We're friends. Doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but we can sit down, have a drink, and say, look, how do we hash this out?
Follow-up question to that. You mentioned your success in Westchester as, part of that was connecting with Black and Hispanic voters.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about your platform and you and your messaging that connects with Black and Hispanic voters?
Primero, yo hablo español. First, I speak Spanish. So
that's great.
That's helpful.
Well done. Well played. Well played.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. And, I won the Hispanic vote outright in my races, which is amazing. We won about 25% of the Black vote. And that's because I went everywhere. I went to all nooks and crannies of Westchester with the same message. I went to churches. I went to synagogues. I went everywhere because I've always had a feeling like if they don't hear your message, if they don't know anything about you, but all they've been hearing is, oh my God, bad Republican, blah, 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 the whole talking points. Why would they vote for you? Or I'm a big believer showing up, smile, shake hands, and we've got a lot of things in common that we can talk about first, and then we can deal with the harder stuff later. And that builds bridges. And that's how we won. And we overperformed in very Democratic areas, which is what we need to do statewide and what we will do in November.
If I can jump in, Robin, if I can ask you to rewind, these Supreme Court decisions were so fresh, they're hours old and so forth. We want to lead with that. But if I can rewind a little bit here, can you give us your stump speech, your platform, kind of in a somewhat with some brevity, your vision? Why should we'll focus on Republicans. That's in a few days. Why should Republicans vote for you on primary day?
My main opponent is Lee Zeldin, who was a state senator in Albany, and he was with the majority with Dean Skelos when they ruled the roost. And unfortunately, it was the go along, get along crowd. It was all dysfunctional. It was corruption swirling around the state capitol, and Governor Cuomo had his way. He told those guys how to vote, and they said, yes, tell me when. So Lee Zeldin voted for all the Cuomo budgets. He was a reliable vote. And I think that just kept us on the wrong path. We needed to change course, which is why I ran against Cuomo in 2014. I won Saratoga County, and I won the North Country and the Capital District. And my message was then what it is now. We have to slow down spending, reverse course. Otherwise, we're going to have a continuation of an outflow of people. We're losing people, we're losing family, we're losing money, we're losing businesses. That's indisputable. So what I did in Westchester is what I will do in New York. And, I keep saying help is on the way. Help is on the way, folks. January when I take office.
Speaking of business, my husband has his own business in upstate New York. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. Being a small business owner in New York State is brutal. It's absolutely brutal. We're getting crushed. And so what steps would you take to not only help support the small businesses that exist throughout New York State already, but also start attracting business back to New York?
Yeah, well, the way you will attract businesses back to New York and keep those that we have and let them grow is not easy, but it has to be done. It's what we did in Westchester. You have to cut taxes. And the only way you can cut taxes is if you stop spending like they're spending. To put it in perspective, the budget went from $178 billion to $220 billion in 2 years. That is insane. And those bills are going to come due. And you know who they're going to come after. It's always the middle class and small businesses that end up paying the freight. So what we have to do is reduce income tax levels, which are the highest in the country, corporate taxes, which of course affect income and corporate affect small business owners. We have to eliminate the estate tax, which affects our small businesses as they try to plan forward and send it to their kids. And our farms, they're all affected by this. As well as property taxes. It's not easy, but I can tell you I did it. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of guts, and you got to stand firm because you know it's right. What we do know, whether people acknowledge it or not, is the direction that we're going in now, we are going off a cliff, period. And in order to pull back and to not have people flee to Florida or the Carolinas, we need to show them that we can be responsible again and that they're going to get a break. It's one of the reasons why, and it may not affect you, but things like speed cameras, red light cameras, congestion pricing plan for New York City, all of these are nickel and diming the average New Yorker who is already fed up and can't afford it to begin with, and they just feel crushed on all sides. So the regulations in New York, as a small business, New York State is like the predator and business to them is the prey. That is not how the relationship should be. It should be they help, they assist, and you make money. God bless you. What it is now is they want your money and they want you out of business. It is so backwards and it is so destructive.
It is difficult for someone like me too, who leans more left. I would describe myself as a moderate Democrat. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to be fiscally responsible, but also provide the services that people in need to survive and exist as Americans, whether that's in our public school system, social services and whatnot. Do you think there's enough? I mean, I think the answer is probably yes, but is there enough waste in our current budget to be able to do what you're describing and not affect the services that people rely on and need to, survive in this state?
There's no question. I cut hundreds of millions of dollars out and inherited a $165 million deficit on that $1.8 billion budget that I took over in Westchester, and nobody complained. In fact, we put some more money into some programs in social services because we knew people were struggling. But that doesn't mean our dollars can't be accounted for or that the programs can't be accountable. If we're just wasting money, we're hurting more than we're helping. So I do believe very strongly in leaders need three body parts. You need a head, because what we're doing is complex. You've got to be able to lead, explain, and know what you're dealing with. You need a heart, because there are a lot of people who do need help. Again, that doesn't mean we just throw money away and keep throwing money at a problem that's never being fixed. It means we actually go after the problem and help those in need. And then the third body part, which we can't find anymore oftentimes, is a spine. Because I can tell you, when the winds get strong in your face, it's easy to cut and run or become a jellyfish, which we've seen. That cannot happen. And I know, because I've been through these battles. When you take a pencil out of the budget, they start screaming, "Oh my God, you're killing kids, you're killing everybody." That's not the truth. And you've got to know that we are morbidly obese as a state right now. The only way we're going to get better and for people to survive is if we get back to the basics and do the basics well and let people flourish. That's not happening right now.
I might have to borrow that head, heart, and spine line if I run again for office. I might have to borrow that one from you.
You got it. Use it.
Thank you.
If I could jump in, because Adam Israel, who could not make it, he's our third co-host on this podcast. He had a question about landlords. They've taken it hard during COVID.
Yep.
Maybe arguably, New York State went too far in lifting the eviction laws and so forth. What will you do as governor for landlords that they don't get stuck with the bills without any income coming in?
It has been so uneven and unfair to property owners. We have a system in this country that's called a contract, and contracts need to be obeyed. Otherwise, we have no law. And basically, the state kind of just ripped up contracts and said to anybody, don't worry about it. You can just pretend there's a pandemic relief that you need, whether your ability to pay or not. And by the way, we're going to give you no rent increases, even though you have real estate taxes and a mortgage to pay and capital improvements to make. If we don't have that balance, everything is going to collapse. The ecosystem collapses. And by the way, real estate and landlords are going to collapse because nobody's going to invest. And the state has already basically said, we want to take over all the buildings. New York State, there's a movement in the state and in New York City to take private property and let the state run it. They have been an abject failure at doing that. And that is not what we should be doing in an open capitalistic society, because it has failed everywhere. So we got to get back to our rent laws and the balance between property owners and tenants.
It seems like a lot of the social contracts that we all took for granted in this country have kind of gone to shit, excuse my language.
Yes.
Like you can, we see people just walk into stores, drugstores,
right.
grocery stores, and walk out with stuff like it's no big deal.
Yep.
And I know that crime and safety are really high on everyone's list in terms of their concerns. And in New York State, the bail reform has been especially frustrating in the sense that I understand some of the ways in which we were incarcerating people and holding them in jail for minor offenses would literally derail their entire life and
Correct.
were unreasonable.
I agree with that.
I'm glad. But taking away judges' ability to put people on bail because they are a threat to society has also been stripped away. How do we get back and find a balance here? So, when someone is arrested for some vicious crime, they aren't just immediately released on the streets again.
We have to get rid of no cash bail and get back to the basics, but we can start all over again. The original intent, as you said, I think had merit. I don't want somebody rotting away in jail. I don't want somebody's career or livelihood or family to be destroyed because they made one bad mistake, nonviolent, and they're going to pay the price forever. That's a burden on society as well as the ruination of somebody's life. So I get that. The problem is we've got all these career criminals that are getting away with murder. They're getting away with everything.
Literally.
We've gone so far. We've got to get back to what worked. And that means respecting law enforcement, giving them the tools that they need. And that's where I would start, because we've gone so far left that we're unrecognizable and people are in jeopardy now. And it's not just a city thing. Yes, crime is exploding in Troy and Albany and in our major cities around the state. But also it means, women especially don't feel safe going places on their own or with their kids. It means that car alarm that's going to go off in the middle of the night, or somebody might, knocking on your door at 2 a.m. or trying to break in. All of those things matter. And it's happening. And it's like, some people don't care. We should. If we don't get crime under control, we're going to lose society. We are never going to get New York State back on track because nobody's going to want to live here or invest here.
I appreciate that because, yes, go ahead, Dan.
Okay, Robin, I wanted to switch to some local Saratoga issues.
I know. I don't know how much time Mr. Astorino has. I know we've been on for quite a while already. Do you have time for another question or two?
Yeah, well, another question or two is fine. Sure.
Okay.
Let me switch to Saratoga Springs. You may have heard we have a horse track here. In fact, we have two. We have a harness track as well as a thoroughbred track. Could you explain? Could you explain to the viewers your connection, your interest with horse racing, and what you would do for the horse racing industry as governor?
I would support it because it's a major industry in New York. Obviously, Saratoga is huge. I've been there for the opening day. I've been there for the races. As I mentioned earlier, I love Saratoga Springs. You may not know this, you wouldn't know this, but my neighbor across the street owns trotters at Yonkers Raceway. And my uncle, when I grew up, had owned horses, thoroughbred horses, and ran them at Aqueduct and Belmont. One of them, the name was Noble Run. And I think it's still running because it was such, as we used to say, what a pig of a horse. Never won a thing. But horse racing is in our blood and our family as well. It's a major industry in New York. It should be supported. And, obviously it means a lot to not just the racing industry, but the tourism industry. You know what happens. Saratoga Springs fills up, and so do the restaurants and hotels.
Yeah.
Right. And related to the horse racing industry are the video lottery terminals that were placed inside the Saratoga casino. And money was promised to Saratoga Springs to come from the VLTs. But every year, the governor, whichever the governor is, puts out a budget, and that money is withdrawn from Saratoga Springs. And we have to fight and beg the legislature to put it back in. Sorry, Robin, go ahead.
No, I just want to speak to that a little more specifically. I just came off of running our public safety department, which included our fire department, police department, and so forth. The video lottery terminal money is earmarked to go to cities that have VLTs in them to help with the infrastructure and crime issues that happen when you have this wave of people who come in to gamble. And so every year when that money is on the chopping block, it means really it has a drastic impact on our ability to run our law enforcement agencies and also keep our streets and sidewalks, in decent shape. And so to go through that stress every year, it takes a tremendous toll on our city. And so a lot of people have been asking us, how you would address the VLT money, and if there was a way moving forward to, get rid of this nervousness and fear every year that it's going to be taken away.
Yeah, that was a promise that the state made with the licensing. And again, I'll come local to where I am, Yonkers Raceway. The VLTs are extraordinarily important to the city of Yonkers for just the reasons you mentioned, public safety. They're bearing the burden, even though this is a good thing, they are bearing the burden of some of this with traffic and issues related to the track and to gambling. So, that's one of the things that bothers me. The state makes their promises and then they take them away pretty quickly. And you think about it, when there's an insatiable appetite to spend, which they have been doing, they're always looking for the big money and for the coins under the couch. And that's what they do. They'll go after your little money there, which relatively speaking to the state is little, but it obviously means a lot to a local government.
Would you commit as governor to maintaining the VLT monies that are coming into Saratoga Springs now?
Yeah, no, I do believe that is a covenant that was between the host communities and the state.
One other question, which you probably aren't aware, I don't know why you would be aware of this, but it's one of the things we're struggling with as a city, with the state in particular and the county. We have had the bars here in Saratoga are open until 4 a.m. And it's probably the only place outside of New York City in all of the state where you can drink until 4 a.m. In the last 2 summers, we've seen a dramatic increase in crime and arrests and violent crime and guns specifically from the hours of about 1:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the morning. And so as a municipality, we voted to shut the bars down at 2 a.m. We aren't able to do that, however, unless we get the approval of the county and the SLA. And the county has no interest. The state has no interest. The governor has, nobody has any interest in our little problem here. But as residents across the board, people would like to see this happen. Is there anything, as governor that you could do or support to help, a municipality like this one struggling with such a fundamental public safety issue to facilitate that? Or do you have any thoughts on it in general, I guess?
Again, you go back to the VLT money. That money is used for public safety, right? So you would have cops posted along the area where there might be some problems. You deal with the small businesses like the bars who obviously want to stay open later because it's revenue for them. And during the pandemic alone, these restaurants and bars were just destroyed.
Right.
Way too many of them were completely and utterly wiped out by, the edicts of the governor. So it is a balance. It is tough at times. And I, just generally speaking, I would defer to the local municipalities on what they prefer. But I also, it's tough for businesses to lose that.
Right.
But I do remember an old saying, nothing really good happens after midnight.
It's true. And,
Yeah.
I suppose that the need to close at 2 a.m. would be offset if we had more funding for our police department and law enforcement. Perhaps that could be a solution. Because it does, we're only talking about probably 1 or 2 bars that are actually doing business between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. But I know we probably have to wrap here. Dan, do you have anything else to ask?
Mr. Astorino, I just want to tell you that we did invite your 3 opponents on. There seemed to be some trepidation in dealing with us. I think we were an unknown to them. You came on. You and your team responded. I want to thank you for that. And I wish you the best of luck and thank you for coming on our podcast and talking about issues important to the state and Saratogians. So I mentioned, and we also invited Democrats as well. And again, I think we're the element of the unknown, and we got through to them. It wasn't like they were lost, and you're the only one. So I give you credit for not being afraid to come on and talk to us.
He's got the spine. He's got that spine part.
That's right.
We really do appreciate it. And we believe deeply in a space where we can have conversations and disagree, but do so respectfully and productively. And it seems like that's the approach that you've taken. And so we're really grateful that you came on today and wish you the best of luck come the 28th. Republicans, go vote on the 28th.
Good luck.
Yes, Rob and Dan, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. Enjoy the weekend and can't wait for the track to open.
Same here. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.